Good afternoon. I think I see a thumbs up back there, so we're going to get started. Welcome to the Teaching and Learning Committee meeting for today, June the 5th. This is the second of our experiment of trying our meetings in the afternoon. This afternoon's agenda, we're going to be looking at the compliance report on the public charter school policy, where we'll have a review and a report on the middle and high school choice for this year. We will have a recommendation around the English language arts curriculum, and then we have some procurement items. So we'll get started with the public charter school policy compliance report.
Good afternoon. My name is Trevor Roberts. I'm a specialist in the Office of New Initiatives.
Good afternoon. Shane Hall, Director of Research.
So we're going to be looking at policy IHB, the public charter school policy, and giving our compliance report today. The policy has us look at three areas of performance in charter schools: fiscal accountability, student performance, and other matters required pursuant to the charter. And throughout this policy, you'll be seeing us split charters into newly created charter schools and conversion charters. Newly created charters are those that were created from scratch, and they get their students through a citywide lottery. Conversion charter schools are schools that converted neighborhood schools, and they receive schools through the zone that that neighborhood school serves. So that's just one thing to keep in mind as we look at these numbers. The charter school policy also includes a renewal process. So the renewal process is designed to hold schools to a high standard. Most of the measures in order to receive highly effective schools need to score in the 65th percentile or higher in order to be rated highly effective in that area. So that's one way that we do hold the charter sector to a high standard. Reports for each school that went through renewal in the previous years are available online, and they're also available in the portfolio review report. And this presentation will be posted online this afternoon so that the public and families and students have access to it. So when we look at charters as part of our portfolio of schools, we're very concerned about ensuring that students have access to quality programming, that they have access just to the schools themselves through location, and also equity in distributing those programs throughout the city. The charter school population for SY 16-17 was 14,690 students. So that's approximately 18% of the overall population of students in the district, and it was about 1,000 student increase from SY 15-16. Some of the notable programs that our charters provide for students are focused either on providing quality student experiences or for operators sharing best practices between themselves and with other schools in the district. So we want to highlight a few here. The Leaders Go Places program at the Crossroads School is a program that that recognizes high achievement among students and also students with improving achievement. So it really incentivizes students to help improve their grades. Students, as part of this program, are often brought to activities that, like going to meet legislators in Annapolis and other school-based experiences within the school to promote leadership among these students. At Baltimore International Academy, students go through foreign language proficiency tests, and these are tests that give them certifications that often last throughout their academic career and to the job market. So, for example, the DELF tests for French, Olympiada for Russian, and the Youth Chinese test provide these certifications that last for years to come. In terms of sharing best practices, our City Neighbors operator group holds a progressive education summit every year where they partner with not just charter schools but also traditional schools and private schools to share innovative best practices, and they have ongoing partnerships throughout the year to help spread those practices. And we have the operator group Baltimore Curriculum Project, who have really become national leaders in restorative practices and work with not just the schools in their network, but also several traditional schools to help develop restorative practices in the district. As we can see here, we see a map of Baltimore, and this speaks to the equity and access for charter schools. You can see that we have charter schools throughout the city and in all quadrants. And here, this next map, we'll look at it in a different way. This map is color-coded by the Community Investment Index. The Community Investment Index looks at 3 factors to determine the investment in each neighborhood. So they look at economic disparity, access to resources, and neighborhood stability and safety. And as you can see, again, we have charter schools in all different types of neighborhoods, from dark green to bright red. And one thing to keep in mind when we're looking at this map is that while we do have a range within the city, Baltimore City, compared to the state, has the highest level of concentrated poverty. So even in some of these areas where you see dark green colors, within the state context, those are still often underserved neighborhoods. So, question is often asked whether charters are attracting students to the district. As I said earlier, the charter enrollment has gone up about 1,000 students from 15-16 to 16-17. But a lot of that increase has come from adding one new school that was added in 16-17, which is Brems Lane, and planned grade expansions at other already existing charter schools. So that 1,000 student increase in charter population is largely explained by those 2 changes. So it's still kind of an open question, the role that charters are playing in attracting students to the district. But there are many charters that do have very high demand, and that's shown by the wait list numbers. Obviously, if a school has not enough seats to serve all their applicants, those applicants go on a wait list. So we see Baltimore Montessori with over 1,100 students, City Neighbors Charter School with almost 500, Green Street Academy with over 600, KIPP with over 600, and Tunbridge with over 450. And these schools and other charters in the district use a variety of ways to increase the demand, including open houses, radio, and other advertising. There's a charter school fair, which is separate from the middle and high school fair, that is put on by the charter sector. And a big thing with a lot of the operator organizations is that they have staff dedicated to parent outreach and ongoing communications with potential applicants. So one difference with charters in Baltimore that we don't see with charters in a lot of other areas of the country is that in Baltimore, the charters, for the most part, serve a very similar demographic of students as as the traditional schools in the district. There are a few differences. Newly created charters still serve fewer economically disadvantaged students than conversion charters in traditional schools. And let's go to the next slide. The conversion charters also serve a higher proportion of Latino students than newly created charters. Some of this is because a lot of the conversion charters are located in the southeast part of the city, where we have a large Latino population. And when we presented this to the Charter and Operator-led Advisory Board, there were questions about racial diversity outside of Latino enrollment. So we looked at that, and there's more information on that in the appendix. But the bottom line is that newly created charter schools serve a higher proportion of African American students than either conversion or traditional schools. And the conversion and traditional schools, conversely, serve more white students and Latino students. So that is one thing to note. And on slide 40 in the appendix is a full breakdown of all demographics. So in addition to serving a similar population of students in terms of economic diversity, charters in the city also serve a similar proportion of students with disabilities as traditional schools. Newly created charters, the numbers are very similar. With conversion charters, they serve a slightly lower proportion. Again, conversion charters are charters that take their students from a specific zone. So that seems to just be that the students in those zones just happen to have a lower rate of disabilities.
Thanks for pointing that out. I think that's a really important point. That's a differentiator for Baltimore charters, because nationally this is a raging conversation that nationally there are fewer students with disabilities within the charter schools, and so some people think that's the case in all charter schools. And I just like to make the point that we do match. These charter schools do match the traditional schools. So I think it's just it's kind of an anomaly, and I think it's an important point for everyone to realize.
Yes, and one more thing to note on this chart is that all school types, charters, newly created charters, conversions, and traditional schools have similar breakdowns of LRE levels. LRE stands for least restrictive environment. But when you get down to the bottom row there, other LREs, those are LREs that require students to have more intensive services or even go to separate public day or private institutions. Those are the students that are significantly more expensive to service. And for the most part, as with all schools, those students aren't showing up in the charters, conversions, or the traditional schools. Yeah.
This next set of slides, we're going to look at academic performance on a number of measures, starting with the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, or KRA. Here you see comparisons of kindergarten readiness rates as measured by the KRA across three school types: charter schools, conversions, and traditional. As you can see, higher rates of kindergarten readiness among students in the charter schools. This may say more about the composition of the student bodies in those schools than about school performance themselves. This is not, for example, controlling for what their prior setting was. Did they go to, for example, a city school's pre-kindergarten program, which we know has been those students in those programs have shown higher levels of kindergarten readiness, in some cases even higher rates than the state as a whole. But this also gives you an idea of where students in these respective settings are starting out from. The next series is going to examine performance on the PARCC in terms of both absolute performance, and then we'll later look at growth. The challenge, as we've discussed multiple past presentations, is that results locally and nationwide, you see a strong correlation between achievement levels, between scores, and household income. And this holds regardless of school type, and there's plenty of national research finds the same thing. Because of this correlation, we're going to show the PARCC results for absolute performance that we're going to show you. We group schools so that we're comparing schools with similar characteristics. We group them into kind of bands based on economic disadvantage. And again, we're using a definition of economic disadvantage that is based on direct certification, Medicaid eligibility, and scoring below 2.5 on the WIDA English proficiency assessment. And the reason for that is to try to capture more of our English learner population. There may be disadvantaged, but are not as well accounted for through measures such as direct certification. In this presentation, we're going to focus on two particular economic disadvantage bands, the 70 to 80% and the 80 to 100%. Reason for this is that, one, the average level of economic disadvantage district-wide is in that 70 to 80 range. It's these ranges where most of our K-8 programs are located in. So for this slide, you see, we see kind of PARCC performance broken up into quadrant. We have the horizontal axis, that is the mean scale score in math for grades 3 through 5, that grade band 3 through 5. The vertical axis is the mean scale score for grades 3 through 5 in English language arts. The dotted lines represent the average scale score district-wide for schools in this 70 to 80% economic disadvantage. So with that, through that dotted line, you kind of have four quadrants. If you're in the upper right hand, that's kind of where you want to be, because that shows you're performing ahead of this whole group average in both subjects. On the other hand, if you're in the bottom left, you're performing below in both. And with the other two, you're above one and behind the other, and vice versa in the bottom right. So here we see a good spread of schools. Most of them are either in the top right-hand quadrant or in that bottom left-hand, a smaller number in the bottom right, meaning they're performing above the group average in math but below the average in English language arts. Your reference tables that accompanied your materials, that enables you to look up particular schools. We show the school numbers here, and we employ a color scheme, red signifying a charter school, green signifying a conversion, and blue signifying a traditional school. We want to pay particular attention to the upper right-hand quadrant here. For 347, you'll see that's KIPP Academie, and almost superimposed right almost on top of it is number 23, that's Wolf Street. Another standout, number 63, that's Rosemont. And then also lower there, 328, that is Southwest Baltimore Charter School. Those are ones performing in that upper right-hand quadrant, means they're outperforming the group average in both subjects.
Can you also mention some of the traditional schools that are up in the upper quadrant?
Yes. Let me pull up my sheet. You'll see, for example, 87, and that is, bear with me just a moment, that is Windsor Hills. Another one, I believe, 21, that's Hilton Elementary.
Charles Carroll
Third
Barrister.
floor, that's Charles Carroll Barrister. So, you see a spread of charter and traditional schools in that upper right-hand quadrant. Here you see that same chart structure the same way as I described earlier, only this is for the 6-8 grade band. And again, we have a number of schools in that upper right-hand. You'll see up in the upper right-hand quadrant, for example, you'll notice 323, that's Crossroads. 347, that's KIPP Academy. 63, again, Rosemont. You'll also see 348, that's Baltimore Leadership School for Young Women. 377 is Green Street. 371, Lily Mae Carroll Jackson. So again, a mix of, and also, some traditional schools in there. Here again, a lot of spread across the four, with, again, most concentrated either in that upper right-hand quadrant or that lower left-hand where they're below the group average in both subjects. And this again is for the 70 to 80% economic disadvantage. This next slide looks at those in the 80 to 100%. See a large number of schools here. Again, a lot of spread. You see some schools across each of the four quadrants. Here in example.
Are we going to, let's focus on the ones in the upper right-hand corner like we have. I mean,
Okay.
I think we should be consistent. I mean, I think the point of this is to look at the performance of all schools in comparison to each other. I think that's why we've done it this way.
Yeah.
So I think we should just be highlighting all schools that are, if we're going to look in the upper right-hand quadrant, let's try to do that consistently.
One in the upper right-hand, you'll see number 64, and that's Liberty Elementary up in that far upper right-hand. You'll also see, for example, 150, that's Marianne Winterling Elementary. You'll also see 261, which is Lockerman Bundy. Again, a lot of spread in this group in the 80 to 100% group for grades 3 through 5. And then here you see that same group for 6 through 8. And for 6 through 8, you'll see, for example, 337, that's AFIA. Number 8, you'll see that's City Springs. Lower down there, 325, that is Connections. Higher up, School 95, that is that's Franklin Square. So once again, as we see with the others, just a good mix of charter, conversion, and traditional schools, and a lot of spread across the four quadrants. And again, your reference tables will enable you to pinpoint specific schools by their school number. But now we've
Really
looked at-
quickly, before we leave the absolute performance, I also just make sure we remind people as a reference point that the PARCC proficiency scale score is 750. So even though we're comparing schools to the district average, we still have a long way to go, just in terms of overall district performance, to reach those levels of proficiency. I also wanted to mention that as far as the schools that were referenced, there is an accompanying data table that lists the data for all schools for all the slides that we're talking about here. So it does break down by school where their placement is on the quadrants for the 3 to 5 versus grades 6 to 8. In the attachments in board docs, there are two additional attachments in addition to the PowerPoint presentation. One of them has the data table for all the schools for the performance slides that Shane just referenced. The second one has a data table for all of the growth data that he's about to present.
Thank you.
We'll now turn our attention to looking at PARCC through a growth context, looking in terms of student growth percentiles. Now, this is something we introduced to you when we shared PARCC results last fall. Student growth percentiles are a measure of how well students perform from one year to the next relative to their peers. And in this case, a peer is someone with the same score as you in the prior year. The way to aggregate student growth percentiles, because each student has a student growth percentile, is you aggregate that into a median, and a median student growth percentile, or SGP, that is a way of summarizing growth for a student group, or in the context of this presentation, for a school. SGPs range in value from 0 to 100. They can be interpreted various ways, but that second box there is kind of a standard interpretation where SGP ranging from 0 to 20 is considered exceptionally low growth, 21 to 40 is low growth, 41 to 60 is about an average or a typical level of growth, 61 to 80 is considered high, and 81 to 100 is considered exceptionally high. This is based on guidance from MSDE, which is using growth as a component of the state accountability plan under ESSA. It is also based on some research done by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary Secondary Ed, which also uses student growth percentiles. Yes?
Okay, so let me try to understand this. Dr. Jones is looking at me, because that was very clear in some levels, but I don't know if everyone's going to follow that. So, if I'm a third grader, and I have scored a 3 on the PARCC, or I get a score on the PARCC, I get a number that matches with that overall number.
Here's a way of thinking about it. Let's say you get a 725,
Yeah.
which makes you a level 3. Let's say I get a 750, that makes me a level 4. And the next year, you get a 730, so you grew 5 points.
Right.
And I get a 755, so I grew 5 points. Now, did I grow faster than you? Did you grow faster than me? Did we grow the same? What an SGP does, it looks at everybody else who got a 725 and everybody else who got a 750 and ranks us that way. So
But let me just jump in.
Okay.
So what I really want to know is that third grader who finishes the year, when he goes to fourth grade, is he learning at the rate that he needs to? Is he growing? And what I don't understand how we get to that. So now I understand you're comparing it against similar students that are at similar scores,
Right.
but how are we seeing how much and how far that one student is growing? Is that clear? No?
If I may, I think there are two ways to answer your question. So one is, as it relates to the SGP, it's really intended to take a look at the peer group defined by individual students that took the assessment and had the same scale score.
Same
So
score.
using your example of, let's say this is a third grader
Has a
taking
725.
an ELA PARCC assessment, let's assume the student had a 720.
Yeah.
Okay? Then what we're looking at is then in the following year, how did the fourth graders, okay, that all as third graders that also had a 720, how did they perform? Okay?
So we should expect him to or her store at where everybody did.
Again, it's a cohort. So now I'm taking a look at, these are the group of third graders. Now that they are fourth graders, okay? Again, I'm only looking at those that had that one scale score, that 720, right? And now I'm looking at what are their fourth grade PARCC ELA scores. I'm creating percentiles for those scores. Now the question is, how does that particular student perform relative to those other students?
But again, to
So-
your point, it doesn't mean that those kids grew a year.
Or
But
it's
that's
ranking
why we
it.
get two different things. So that's why I want to make the point here that there are multiple ways of looking at growth, and this is one defined way of looking at growth, which is to say, for this peer group, how did you perform relative to other students the following year, based on the fact that you were at the same starting point the prior year?
But if
So
they're
that's
all
one
low and they're growing a little bit, that still means they're pretty far behind.
Correct, which
I
gets
want to
to
know
a
if they're
second,
okay.
which is another question, which is a different way to look at growth, which in part gets to growth to proficiency in terms of setting targets for how much students are expected to grow. So that's a second question. A third question gets at, to what extent are you demonstrating a year's worth of growth? And the way that we tend to look at that tends to be at the performance level, not at the scale score. Now, you can do it at the scale score because PARCC scale scores are vertically aligned, right? So when I think about a performance level 4 being a score of a 750 on any PARCC grade score is going to tell me that that's considered having met the proficiency threshold. So, in essence, if I take a look at a student whose scale score is the same from one year to the next, just the same, that is interpreted to mean they've grown by 1 year.
Yeah.
So even though that 1 year's worth of growth
Is the
may
same
not get me
spot.
to proficiency, it is considered a year's worth of growth because now I'm being tested on a different grade level worth of standards, but I'm performing essentially at the same level within the expectations for that standard. Does that make sense?
It does, but still tough to grasp. Like, here's what I want to know. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the proficiency bands. If our kids are performing, which at their scaled score is a level 2 or 3, I want to see those kids by the next grade getting to a 3 or 4. I don't want them staying at a level 2. Like, I want them to move to level 3. Now, proficiency's level 4, I understand that. But I want us to be able to say our kids are moving.
Correct.
Making
They're making
progress.
Correct.
And I don't think we're clearly articulating that in the way we're doing this here. But I know it's I don't.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think that's part of what we've been sort of trying to have conversations around what are the various ways to think about growth, because what you're describing in part gets to growth towards proficiency.
Yes.
And this question around like, well, how much accelerated growth do I have to have so that from my starting point today, so if I'm a third grader, how do I get to being proficient by 8th grade? How do I get to being proficient by 10th grade? Like whatever that looks like.
And I don't want to be deflating to say that we're expecting the kids who are 1 and 2, which is the majority, in some schools, the majority of our children, we're expecting them to get to 4 tomorrow, like next year. But we want to chart a pathway for them to get there. And I'm not, so all of this peer group comparison, when nobody's at really that proficiency, it doesn't chart the pathway
It
well
doesn't
enough.
tell the full story.
Yeah.
But it does tell part of the story, because part of what we also want to understand is, by comparison, are our students doing better or worse than their peers? Because that is a relevant reference point, even if that doesn't completely get us to where we want to be on the proficiency scale. And that's why I think, to Shane's credit, I think we've tried to at least create some level of understanding that there is a relationship between proficiency and growth, but they're not one and the same,
Yes.
and it's not a one-to-one correlation. And that's why it's really important whenever we talk about PARCC data that we're looking at both. So even to my earlier comment about looking at how our students are performing in that upper right quadrant, by comparison, we have schools
It's
that
not
are
even at-
outperforming
yeah,
the district
proficiency.
average, but that doesn't mean that
Right.
those schools have, high percentages of students that are proficient on PARCC.
So
So if
then
you just look at
what's-
our district aggregate scores, we're still in the teens in many cases with the percentage of students that are meeting that level 4 or 5 threshold. So to your point, in terms of how can we use the data to have motivational conversations, that's part of the value of being able to look at it this way, because it does acknowledge the fact that we do have schools that are moving students faster than their peers. And in this case, we're looking at percentile data that's based on the state. So all the students across the state that were at a particular scale score level in the prior year, how are our students in our schools performing relative to that? So again, I recognize that there is complexity to this broader question, and I certainly appreciate when we have these conversations, because I think it's a great opportunity to try to educate ourselves around the nuances and the complexity. But I just want to caution that I don't think that there's a single simple answer and view that we'll be able to present that really gets at what you're describing in a way that's going to satisfy and take into consideration all of those different nuances.
So there's not a plan to look at growth towards proficiency.
We've got to work towards what that looks like.
What that looks like.
What does that look like?
And how we articulate that clearly to people, grade to grade.
Correct.
I think that is the nut we need to crack, and that community members know and parents know that, yes, I worry that we're making growth, but we're way behind where we need to go, so I don't want people to be patting themselves on the back either.
Right.
So thank you.
Right.
We've had this conversation now for over 2 years about how do we capture this, but I'm going to still be asking questions.
And
till
I
my last-
appreciate that, and I
Yeah.
completely agree with you, and I'm acknowledging that we're still trying to grow in our understanding around what that means, because part of the challenge, I mean, again, we do now have, 3-4 years worth of data, so we have more data to work with to understand it, but it is challenging to say, well, then how much growth on a PARCC assessment do you really need to have if I'm trying to close a certain gap, knowing how far behind many of our students are performing. And I think that's also why the state at large is challenged by this question, because as a state, we're still not at the level of proficiency that we were when we had MSA data. So I'm acknowledging that what you're saying is the same set of questions that we wrestle with. It's the same conversation happening at the state level. But at least our wish for is that this view at least provides some useful information to understand, at least contextually, how our students and schools are performing relative to others.
Okay, my last question, I promise, Ms. Chinia. If a school decided that they wanted to dig into this at an individual level, I know we have to aggregate things up at the district level, but they wanted to actually, they get individual school level scores, and they can break it down by scale score and proficiency level, and they could set targets for themselves on, we want to move our students, and this is what it means to be a grade level based on this, and this is what we want to do to kind of accelerate our kids to get to where they need to go, and we can have targets around different levels towards proficiency. They have the data to be able to do that
That
by
is
the
correct.
individual school, individual
They
student?
have individual student data and
Yeah.
they have school level data
Okay.
at both the scale score and performance level.
I doubt that they really have the understanding of how to do what you're talking about. I mean, because we're having I know I've had this conversation several times, you've had the conversation several times, you guys have had the conversation several times. So this is not easy to understand. And so I think the idea that our schools actually have it in a way that's actionable is probably not very realistic.
That's the $100 million
Yeah.
question.
And so,
That's actionable.
yeah, they are. I mean, so, yeah. So I think part of the challenge is that there's so many different ways that we're trying to use the data for different purposes.
Exactly.
So, if it is that you're trying to track how our students progress against proficiency, because we want to know, are we getting there? That's one purpose. But sometimes we're tracking it, like in the purposes of the previous slides, we want to try to look at the relative performance of schools, and we want to avoid, sometimes what we do is we present data and student growth percentiles, this is true for them too, that you present data in such a way that schools that basically have a less high need population are just doing better. And then those schools are kind of like resting on their laurels as if there's nothing they need to do. And so part of what we're trying to do in those previous slides is try to show, like, let's look at where you are in comparison to similar schools, because it's one thing to say that you've got a school that's 30% poverty and you're outperforming schools that are 90% poverty. That's not very informative.
Yeah.
And so you should actually be looking at, are you really moving students that have similar poverty rates? And so sometimes that's the appropriate context, and then sometimes it seems like it's appropriate to measure against a goal. And so I don't know if there's ways that we could devise where we're going to measure students' goal against making the progress you're talking about, but then in the context of the similar schools. Because I feel like that is what we're trying to achieve, is like on the one hand, we want to have high goals, so we want to be able to really show, are you making measures towards progress? Are kids actually catching up? But then we also do want to have a way of measuring that's actually showing, we want to disincentivize our schools that are trying to do something harder, our principals that are trying to do something harder, which is serve harder to serve schools.
Right, and again, I know we want to move on, but really quickly, I will say this. The challenge around the setting of goals is how do we ensure that the goals are rigorous, but yet attainable?
Yes,
And that's
I get
been
you,
really
I
the
got you.
question around having the data for multiple years of really unpacking. Well, then what does it take to get from, as you described, a level 1 or 2 to a level 4 within X amount of time, depending on what grade level you're starting with? Because inevitably, it's going to look different. Getting a student who's a level 2 to a level 4, who's a third grader, versus a ninth grader, that's going to look different. So,
What I want to see is like a student who's a level 2 in third grade, by fifth grade is a level 4. And I want
And what does
us
it take
to
to
be
get
able
there?
to arm principals and expert teachers in the pathways of what skills they need to get there. And we're not expecting it in 1 year, but in 3 years, I'd like to see it. And so we'll keep
Yeah.
digging in. So
yeah. No, I appreciate the question and appreciate the board's willingness to engage in the challenging conversation.
Okay. Well, the median SGPs that we're going to show you, median SGPs, we found for our schools ranged from exceptionally low to high. We didn't see any in the exceptionally high range. And again, say a median SGP of 65, we're saying that students in this particular school, on average, grew faster than 65% of their peers. And again, peers, students across the state with similar scores. Again, yes, you may have low levels of performance, but they're moving in the right direction. This kind of breaks down the median SGP. We break it out by grade bands, 3, 5, 6, 8 for both subjects, and the management types, charter, conversion, and traditional. Total number of schools in each category, and we break down those with low SGPs, those in the typical or average range, again, that's 41 to 60, and those with high SGP, that's above 60. And in this next slide, we're going to name those schools with those high SGPs. And in ELA for 3-5, we see Patterson Park, Hampstead Hill, and Charles Carroll Barrister. We'll see others there in the 6-8 range. You can see on that table.
And the numbers in parentheses after the school names are the growth percentile.
The actual median SGP for that school. And then here you see those median SGPs, the school with high SGPs in math, that previous table being for ELA.
So we're going to head on to performance in secondary schools. So most children in charter schools are in the elementary and middle levels. So the charter population in the high schools is only around 2,000 students, so keep that in mind as we look at this. And when we look through this section, the schools will be split up as charter schools, non-selective traditional schools, and selective traditional schools. Selective traditional schools are those that have some kind of entrance criteria for placement in that school, whether a composite score or a performance-based thing like Baltimore School for the Arts. So these are our schools like Publie, Mervo, Carver, Western, and those schools with entrance criteria. One thing to note here that's important to keep in mind as we look at performance is that for the non-selective traditional schools, if you look at their overage population, it's over 50%. So that has a large impact on achievement at this grade level. So the big takeaway as we look at high schools is that improvement is needed overall in our high school levels to meet proficiency in PARCC. For English 10, charters perform better than non-selective schools with 11.3% of students meeting or exceeding expectations, as opposed to 0.9% for non-selective schools, and the rate at selective schools is 32.4%. For Algebra 1, 3.5% of students at charters met or exceed expectations versus 3.1% at non-selective schools and 18.9% for selective schools. For the four-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, the charter graduation rate is a little lower than selective schools, 84.2% versus 89.2%, but they're both significantly higher than we see at our non-selective schools, which are 61.7%.
And these charts break out the average scale scores in ELA 10 and Algebra 1. Both are high school graduation requirements. As with the other PARCC tests and subjects, the minimum score for proficiency is 750. You can see the average scale scores across the three types. The selective high schools averaging around or just above the level needed for proficiency level 3. Then you'll see a lower one among the charter schools, and then among the non-selective or traditional high schools, which, as Trevor alluded previously, have higher proportions of students who are overage and undercredited. That previous slide looked at average scale scores. This is looking at those actual proficiency rates, the percentage of students with a level 4 or 5. You can see in both ELA 10 and Algebra 1, our selective high schools far outperforming, again, both the charter and the non-selective and traditional in both subjects. And then here we look at the 4-year adjusted cohort rate. So this would be students who are first-time ninth graders in school year 2013-14. Highest graduation rate is among the selective high schools, just under 90%, compared to about 84% for charters, and just shy of 62% for the non-selective and traditional high schools. This next section, we'll look at school climate.
So charters as a whole have higher student satisfaction than at traditional schools. In terms of attendance, newly created charters have slightly higher attendance in elementary grades. At the high school level, charters had a higher rate of attendance than both non-selective and selective schools. Chronic absence rates at newly created charters lower than conversion in traditional schools, particularly at elementary and high school levels. Conversions do have a higher chronic absence rate than other types at the elementary level. Chronic absence rates at charter high schools is lower by more than half than at non-selective traditional schools. And suspension rates at conversion charters are much higher than newly created charters in traditional schools in elementary grade levels. And at middle and high school levels, newly created and conversion charters have lower suspension rates than traditional schools.
And these next few slides will show those data in form of charts, starting with the school survey for students given in 2016-17. You can see the results broken out by school type for charter, conversion, traditional, and then in the case of high schools, selective high schools. You'll see results broken out by grades 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. This based on the percentage of students who indicate a level of satisfaction with their schools. Here you see attendance rates by grade band. You can see very similar across K5 and 6-8. Of course, you see differences when you look at 9-12, and those will be magnified further when we look at chronic absence rates. And as you will see here, similar levels of chronic absence in grades K5, especially between conversion and traditional schools, lower levels of chronic absence, in that case among the charter schools. And then once you look at 9-12, you will see very differing rates, again, with the non-selective traditional high schools, higher levels of chronic absence among students who, again, larger proportions of overage and undercredited students. But despite that, we recognize chronic absence is a problem across all types of high schools, as you can see there. And here we look at suspension rates by grade band, again for grades 1 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12, comparing charter, conversion, and traditional. That will turn to financial information.
So financial ratings will be the last area that we look at. This is a particularly important area as when we look nationally, when we see charter schools failing, it's often because of financial issues. So we try to get as good a picture of our charter's financial states as possible. So some of the things we looked at are auditor reports, a short-term liquidity ratio to make sure that schools are maintaining a good cash flow, and the auditor's opinion on the financial statements that are provided to the district. Here we see the financial ratings for the schools that went through renewal in SY16-17. These ratings are either meets expectations or does not meet expectations, which is how we look at the schools in renewal. Any comments or questions?
Any other comments or questions? Just one that's really hits me, and that's this issue of the non-selective high schools, and that just, it's sort of glaring as you look at this data. We have a set of students that opt for going into a pool for the charter. We have a set of students that meet the requirements to get into the selective, and then it looks like what's left. We need to take a good look at the offerings and what we are doing for those children, because I understand that you're saying many are overage, but that chronic absence rate says a little bit more to me than just that they're overage. If the program isn't meeting a need, or it isn't anything that's challenging enough or interesting enough to keep me there, then I won't come to school, and it's definitely showing up.
No, you're absolutely right. So that has been a challenge for a long time, that we have a lot of our seats in the high school are entrance criteria seats. It's probably a higher percentage of our seats are our entrance criteria seats than should be, and then you see in other jurisdictions. And so what it means is that the students in the schools that are not entrance criteria, students that are not meeting those criteria, that have more likely to have special ed issues, more likely to have challenges, be behind grade level and so on, are all concentrated in certain schools, which makes it very difficult for those schools to be successful, very difficult for those principals. So we really have to take a hard look at what we're doing about that. And you're right about the programming. What kind of programming are we offering? And also, really, should all the schools that we have that are entrance criteria really still be entrance criteria, or should we be limiting how many schools are entrance criteria so that we have more of a mix in other schools?
Allison, what is the how does a school become an entrance what is the difference between an entrance criteria school and a school that is not an entrance criteria school, and why do we have the difference?
So most of the entrance criteria schools, almost all of them, have been that way for years and years. So very few of them are relatively new. In fact, when Dr. Alonso was here at one point, he put a moratorium, if you will, on the addition of new entrance criteria schools. So most of them have been entrance criteria for a long time. So so it's, it's the ones that people think of, like City, Poly, Western, but then it's also Mervo, Carver,
Edmondson.
And
And
Trevor will be able to rattle them all off.
Dunbar.
What?
Dunbar.
And Dunbar. And then some that have some version of entrance criteria that was added relatively recently are, so the design school, there is some type of entrance criteria for it's a 6 through 12, but to get into the high school, if you didn't attend the school in middle school, you do have to put together a portfolio, and the portfolio is reviewed to get into the design school. And for BARD, there is a
Interview and essay.
It's not on the GPA, but there is an interview and essay.
No scores.
Right, that's part of that.
We're sort of morphing into our next report, to be honest, because we're going to talk about those with the choice. So I want to make sure, we have one last?
Just one comment.
And then
One
we'll
of the
go
things
with
about the charter schools that we've always said is the sharing of best practices, and want to push us to just think about how are we pushing out really good practices that they're capturing. And I just want to highlight one that I observed that you had mentioned. I did see a restorative practice circle at one of our charters that was an 8th grade teacher at a Baltimore Curriculum Project school that just did a phenomenal job with 8th graders talking about what does it mean to be a role model. And it was incredible. It was calm, the kids were engaged, he had a method to do it, they were all in a circle, and it just really just hit home. I haven't really been part of an effective circle like that in a classroom setting, and that's just a great practice that you highlighted. And so I guess we don't have to respond to it. It's the question is we should always be thinking about how are we getting our traditionals to go observe that practice? How are we capturing that and pushing it out? How are we doing joint PDs or having expectations of charters that they're sharing those practices as they get established?
So I think absolutely this is an area of growth for us, and it's something we need to get better on. I will say, and to the point that you just made, we just recently convened the intensive learning sites for restorative practices, and so Principal Riquetta from City Springs came with 2 students and talked about restorative practices at City Springs and ran a circle for the staff for all the school staff that was there. So we're definitely trying to work on it, but it's absolutely an area of growth. We haven't done as good a job as we should in terms of learning from the exemplars that we have in some of our innovative schools.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to be certain that we have a sign up for comments, because that's one of the reasons that we did the afternoon sessions was to allow for that. So we're okay in terms of people signing up who may want to speak to us? Yes. Okay, good. So let's move to the middle and high school choice results. And we'll hear a little bit more about those criteria.
Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Warren, Executive Director for Student Wholeness.
And I'm Jessica Wilson, Director of Strategy and Compliance in the CAO's office.
And we are here today to talk a little bit about improvements that we have been making to our choice process along the way in 2017 and 18, as well as the results of that process for this year. And we'll also share with you some thoughts about how we're going to continue improving the process moving forward. So one of the things that we did this year that was new was to try to get out and reach more people with information about how the choice process works. And to do that, we partnered with a number of different organizations such as libraries, community centers, et cetera. And our staff went out and worked in those locations to get information out to families. So families came and attended in a variety of locations. We are going to continue that process in the coming year and hopefully add some new locations as well. So we'll be looking for more partners in the fall for that. In addition to that, we've made a number of other improvements to the process that we're happy about. One thing was to add a milestone fact sheet that provides, kind of quick and accessible information for families to help them prepare for both middle and high school choice. We introduced a process so that we could help families with early learners engage more easily in the process by doing a presentation for them at the Choice Fair, which went over quite well. And then we also collected information in a central location and posted on our website so that families with students who were interested in attending the shadow days in high schools were able to find that information easily and then get there.
We're also continuing the communication and outreach this spring and into the summer. We've already done 2 events where enrollment choice and transfer staff have gone out and done presentations or been available to speak to families at other events, and we're going to continue doing this in kind of a pop-up style throughout the summer at some of the block parties that the mayor is hosting, as well as other events such as Artscape. And we're always looking for additional opportunities, and we're working with the Family and Community Engagement Office to identify areas where that would be beneficial, and we'd be able to really reach families where they're already going for other events. The second piece is that we're implementing we're doing a choice ambassador pilot this year, where we're identifying community members or organizations that are influential in their neighborhoods and bringing them in to do a brief training on what the choice process is and some basic information so that they're prepared to answer questions and help connect families to resources as families go through this process this coming fall.
Okay. So moving on, just a kind of a recap on how the choice process works. So the high school choice process, students have the opportunity to fill out an application where they choose up to 5 preferred schools. All of these applicants are then ranked. For our entrance criteria schools, they're ranked according to a composite score from highest to lowest. For all of the other schools, there's a lottery conducted if there are more students wanting a school than there are seats. Then there's a matching algorithm that's used to place students into their highest choice school, the highest possible choice school, according to their ranking. And that's worked out relatively well. Over the past 3 years, students have consistently been placed in their first or second choice 70 to 75% of the time.
So when we take a look at the results for this year, we have had a slight decline of 31 fewer students submitting an application at the high school level, which resulted in approximately a 1% decline in participation rate. And when we look at what that looks like for the actual rankings, we saw a slight increase in the number of students who received their first choice, and a relatively steady across the rest of the categories.
This goes to the lottery piece. So I was informed that individual schools hold lottery. We don't have a centralized lottery. Can you just explain how the lottery works? Because I'm actually confused by it.
Yeah, they're the charter schools that by and large do their own lottery process. For the traditional schools that are choice schools for the high school level, the way that a lottery happens is if there is a school that has more students apply than there are seats available, they're randomly assigned a number through a random process here at central office that provides them a ranking for that seat.
So traditional schools that are non-criteria based, that are more, they're schools that, and we assign them per school a number, just because there's how many, do you have a sense of how many schools? Because what I'm confused by is then individual charters then are doing their own
lottery process, yes.
Some charters do participate in the choice. They have the option to, so there are some, yeah.
Yeah, so there is an individual lottery run for each school in a situation where there are more students that apply than there are seats available. So a single student could have lottery numbers at a set of traditional high schools and a lottery number for each individual charter that they apply to. So you end up with a lottery rank for every school that you apply to that has a lottery for that year.
So I'm a student, I could potentially get my number could get pulled up in 4 schools and then I get to choose which one I want?
Yes, and for the charters, that's largely separate, although there are a few that work through our system. In the choice system, the way that would work is if you pulled 4 different numbers, if you got a seat at your first choice, that's where you go. If you get and it would go down that order.
By your preference.
And that's
by
what
your
would be
preference.
communicated to you. You wouldn't get a
Yes.
choice, like you said. You wouldn't
Right.
you wouldn't know that you got into all 4.
You would just get the acceptance letter that says you got
'Cause you've
choice
ranked
1
them.
or 2.
You've already
Because
previously
you've already
ranked them.
provided us your preference.
Yeah, I just think in the community, it's come out really clearly, there's an equity issue about the charter lotteries. And if you know about a charter, you can put in the lottery, but if you don't, we're really not communicating that well. And to be honest, I've been on the board and I thought we had a centralized process where everybody threw it in and we did it. And it's something that the enrollment task force, when they come up with their recommendations, is going to address this issue, but I just think it's really important. And I just wanted to raise that publicly.
So one of the things we wanted to highlight as well is that we had an opportunity to work with some student groups this year as we went through the choice process. In particular, the student organizing a multicultural and open society, or SOMOS, from City College came and presented to staff as well as to some board members who had an opportunity to go out and see their presentation. They were identifying what they saw as a potential problem in the choice process for English language learners, in particular how it relates to their situation and composite scores. And so they did a great job of pulling together some information and presenting to staff basically that there was opportunities for improving that experience for English language learners. So one of the things that we looked at was what was the difference between the populations that are identified as English language learners or recently exited ELs or emerging bilingual families compared to other student populations as far as acceptance into entrance criteria and other areas. And what we found was that there being not necessarily students who are currently identified as ELs, but exited ELs and recently exited ELs are being accepted at those entrance criteria schools at actually a higher rate than we would expect based on their population in the school's district, but they're not accepting the seats. And so one of the things that we did this year was really be intentional about reaching out to those accepted students, working with those entrance criteria schools to connect with them early to try and see if we can get more of them to accept the seats in the fall. The second piece of it was they identified that for students who just came to city schools, and often it's their first experience in schooling in the United States, it isn't uncommon for grades to be waived for that first year as they're getting those English language services and really acclimating themselves to the language itself. And so in the past, when we had come across missing grades, at an individual school, the school liaison for choice may identify it and have pulled information and then updated some of that. What we did was we were intentional about going through and looking for all of those instances and trying to do it as a centralized process to make sure we were identifying all the students who could potentially benefit from that. The second thing we did as part of that process was reaching out to 8th grade ESOL teachers to identify any students that they had that they thought the grades in 7th grade may not accurately reflect their achievement and their actual abilities based on the fact that they were still acquiring language skills in 7th grade but had progressed in 8th grade. And so we're working right now to make sure that we are accurately placing those students with their families and their teachers to make sure that we're representing where they're at right now, not necessarily where they were in 7th grade. In addition to that,
I just want to say thank you. I met with that student group twice, and the responsiveness and the openness of the staff here was incredible. And I think we're actually, the idea that we have kids who have been accepted but haven't converted, and now we're going to see a greater percentage, everyone just acted in the best interest of the kids, and I just want to thank you all for the work there.
in order to continue that work, we're going to conduct some school-based focus group with 8th graders to get additional information to really focus on, like this year, we focused on the kids that had already applied. We're going to be looking at trying to actually increase the rate of application for this coming year through these focus groups and really understanding what the barriers are. We know anecdotally that a lot of times it's about transportation and concerns about being accepted at the school, but we want to go deeper on that and really see if we can address some of those concerns even before they apply. We are researching the feasibility of having some sort of 8th grade summer transition program, not just for EL students, but in general for these entrance criteria programs for students that might benefit from having a week or two of dedicated support prior to starting school. The Teaching and Learning Office is also establishing a working group with the ESOL teachers to examine the process and see if there's anything that the teachers can do or identify to help improve that as well. And of course, we're going to continue to engage parents, community members, and students as we go through this improvement process.
Okay. So as we move forward into the coming year, we are going to continue to try to strengthen this whole process. One piece of that work is going to be around analyzing the data that we have to make sure that we're targeting additional assistance to schools so that we increase participation in the process. And again, not just blanketing more people with more information, but making sure we're being very focused about getting to people who maybe haven't been participating at quite the same level as we might like. And that includes also identifying populations where we would, of people that we would conduct focus groups with. And then in general, continuing to improve our communication of the process and also offering an online application for people to participate in Choice Online. It has been on paper in the past.
So next we want to talk a little bit about the middle school choice process. This is similar to high school, but it has some additional components in the assignment. So they are allowed to select 5 choices similar to high school. For middle grades, you have the advanced academics and some other entrance criteria like programs that is again based on the composite scores or the requirements for that particular program. And then you have basically a separation of the eighth or the fifth graders in the district between priority 1 and priority 2. Priority 1 are students who attend a pre-K to 5 and do not have a zoned middle school seat. So those are the population that have to participate in choice in order to be assigned a seat. Priority 2 are students who already have a assigned middle grade seat, either because they attend a pre-K to 8 or they are already in a feeder pattern. So they have a school, they can participate in choice, but they already know where they're going next year if they choose not to participate in choice. There's also...
That means, for example, if a student is at Mount Royal and they're in the 5th grade, if they don't decide to participate in the choice application, they just continue in that school?
That's correct.
Okay.
Do you have the percentage of students, that was a very similar question I had, the percentage of students who do not participate in middle school choice? They don't, oh,
We
that's
do have
coming up.
that information, and it's coming up in just a
Okay,
moment. I want to go through the other two pieces that are an overlay as part of the process. There's a sibling preference component to middle school choice, so if you have a sibling in a school, you'll be ranked higher for that seat. And there's also a quadrant overlay. We try and assign students to schools that are closer to their home for their middle grade students based on 4 quadrants in the city. So this is where, to your question, we have seen a decline in the participation in middle school. This year it held fairly steady, but overall it's been declining as we've gone through the last few years. The number of students that you see up there that submitted an application is actually representative of both priority 1 and priority 2 students. As of the September 30th official enrollment, we had about 1,600 priority 1 students, and that 73% there is the participation rate for just those priority 1 students.
What do you account for that? Do we have great neighborhood option schools that kids can flow into, or is this something that we're worried about, or is just?
So
Yeah,
it is something that we're worried about, and so this just shows kind of how that shakes out
Yeah.
when we're looking at the placement, because this is a piece of answering that question. So over time, we have seen an increase in the number of students who participate in the choice process but do not receive a placement. And that's based on a variety of factors that I'm going to walk through now as we go through the information. So when you're talking about choices, we have, over the past few years, kind of reduced the number of middle school seats that are considered choice. So right now, we have a little over 1,000 choice seats in the district, but we have more priority 1 students than we have choice middle school seats. And so this year, everyone who submitted an application did not receive a placement, not because they had filled out a form wrong or something like that, but there just weren't enough seats for everyone to actually receive a choice middle school placement. And so when we're looking at that, that doesn't necessarily mean that the students aren't going to have a middle school seat next year. It just means that they have to go through the enrollment choice and transfer process this year, and they'll be placed with the family consulting, obviously, in a seat that's available either at a pre-K to 8 or at another school or another seat that wasn't identified as a choice seat through this process.
Okay, I'm going to ask, that was a question that I had, because my grandchildren are at a school that has a middle years IB program, and there have been people that have called because that was not listed as a choice. However, there's interest in, children there that want to go to other programs and people that want to come in. So is that one of the examples that you're talking about, that they may still get a placement even though they weren't included within the choice process?
So it's not necessarily about the specific types of programming like the example you have there. It's an example of, I am in a pre-K to 5. I submitted a choice application, or maybe I didn't submit a choice application. By the end of the summer, the Enrollment Choice and Transfer Office makes sure that you have a placement. That might be at the pre-K to 8, that's the zone right next to you, because they had a seat available. So it's not necessarily the program-dependent conversation that's impacting there with the IB, but it's looking at, we have seats available, they just weren't identified as choice seats for families to select through this process, and making sure that the district connects the families to the seats that are available.
Okay, but in terms of some of the programming, would that be something that we might also be looking at in terms of improving or expanding the choice?
One of the things that we're going to be doing as one of the next steps is taking a look at how we identify choice seats, because we know we have seats, and so that's definitely one of the things that we'll be looking at is the different types of programming that are available and identified as choice.
My other question is, Francis got key. That was
Yeah.
surprising to me, but also it's hard to get to. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it's like great facility, great fields, Under Armour's right there. It seems like we should be able to market the heck out of Francis Scott Key and get students there.
So we know anecdotally, we haven't done like a survey of everyone, but it's 100% the location and the transportation
It's
issue.
the transportation.
And parents concerned about the number of buses students have to take in order to get
A
there.
number of buses. Yeah, we should think about that.
So just to get an idea of geographically what we're looking at, we took a look at priority one school, middle school students who participated in choice and did not receive a placement. So on the left-hand side, you see that those students are over the community conditions index, so you get an idea of what that looks like in the city. And then the right-hand side shows you the pre-K to 5 zones. So you can see that the students who are not receiving a placement are largely related to where that pre-K to 5 is located in the city. This shows us where students, priority one students, have not submitted an application. So this is a part of the follow-up where we want to go and target assistance to areas where we're seeing increased numbers of students that are not participating in that first round of choice. Both asking them why they're not participating and then making sure that we're providing additional targeted support to those schools to make sure that the choice process is being experienced positively by families. So he's already talked a little bit about some of these next steps. One is we really do want to dig into the data and really think about how we are targeting assistance to schools and families through this process, and really focusing in on the areas where we can see need based on the participation rates.
My only thing is, I know you are already doing this, I just want to say it with, is that the enrollment task force, as they come up with their recommendation, they're going to be middle school and high school secondary recommendations, and just to make sure that we're coordinating. Dennis Jutras sits with us, has sat with us in some meetings, and I just want to make sure you guys are coordinating really closely.
Another piece of the work is really taking a look at how we're identifying choice seats. So we have schools that are not identified as choice but have seats available, and so throughout the course of the summer and the fall and through the portfolio process, we want to identify seats that we should be offering to families as part of the choice process, because we know that they're available. So if we do have pre-K to 8s that have seats, we want to make sure that families have the ability to say, I want that seat as part of this first round of choice, rather than having to go through the enrollment choice and transfer process after going through that first round of choice. And another piece of that is and there'll be an additional presentation on what this work group looks like, but there's a staff work group that's cross-functional that's been looking at middle grades programming, to your question, that'll be presenting later on in the year. That'll give you some ideas of how we're thinking about that programming piece of middle grades, because improving the programming that students have access to is definitely a part of improving this process for families.
Okay, so just to recap and wrap it up, the online choice application is something that we're working on trying to roll out. There's also a review of CTE programming and options underway, being led by our College and Career Readiness team. We have a team that's working on looking at the composite scores and the impact of the entrance criteria policies. And then we mentioned earlier as well a redesign of the choice guide to make that more accessible for families, and just generally trying to continue to improve the communication and supports to families through focused communications to those people where we feel like they might really benefit from that added outreach.
Could I also add, and it may be a part of the supports, but the impact of choice now that we have K to 8 schools is tremendous, because you have families now that twice in their experience of that school going to have to go through this. And I would love to say it gets easier if you've done it once, you know, for the 5th into 6th, and then when you get to the 8th to get ready for it. But it in some ways it doesn't. And the fact that there are not necessarily additional staff support there, like counselors or folks, generally a teacher might be just identified as the person who's trying to do that. So if that could be a part of the discussion around this, I think this is an important piece of the experience, but in K-8s, it has quite an impact. And a family that has both the middle school and the high school choice process to go through, it's a daunting experience. I just have to tell you that, especially with 5 choices to make. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
When I see the program for the school, I see all programs and then advanced academic. I'm on slide 16. When we say all programs, what does that mean?
It is the designation in our system that basically means that all of the seats are the same program. So advanced academics is a specific program, and so when you look at high school, if you looked at a similar slide, it would list out different types of programming, especially at the CTE sites. So it's just the standard way that we present the information, and so in middle school, it just means all of the seats are available, and it's the standard middle school programming for that school.
Is there something, can we have access to that information, the programs per school?
We do. I can't remember if it ended up being one of the, no, these are just the preferences. I can get that information to you because it's in the choice guide, and we do have it in an Excel sheet as well that we can make sure that we get to the board.
And then secondly, who sets the entrance criteria for the criteria entrance schools? Is it the schools? Do we do that?
It's governed by board policy.
It's governed by board policy.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Clarifying for my own, because I'm unclear now. So is it specifically how it's calculated is in the board policy, or just that there is entrance criteria?
There's board policy and regulations, and so I don't remember what is in which one. The policy establishes that entrance criteria exists, and I think the regulations have the actual
How it's
information on
calculated.
composite scores, but I'd have to double check to make sure.
And I'm only asking because I'm looking on the district's website where it has for the high schools at least, the different composite score requirements that you need for each of the schools. It says that schools use different formulas to calculate the score depending on the formula that applies to the particular school. So I guess this is something that we need to look into the policy for criteria.
Yeah, and those are established by the policy and the regulation. It's not up to the individual school what their calculation is. So it's written down here. They don't get to update it or change it without board approval.
That does come out in the choice. You get that piece.
Well, if it's in the reg, it wouldn't require board approval. That would require staff approval.
Staff, all right.
Yeah, just to clarify, if it's in the reg, which I think the actual
it is.
formulas are in the reg, not in the policy, that wouldn't require board approval. That can be done at the staff level. So I think it's in the reg, not the policy, but the school can't do it themselves.
Thank you. I am cognizant we have one more report, and then we have some procurement, and we do want to make certain that we're leaving time for public comment.
They can just go to what the recommendation is.
And is everyone okay with that one? We're going to, because we've had the full presentation, the request from the majority of the committee is that we just go to the recommendations. We're okay with that, if you all will help you out a little there.
Absolutely.
That would be good. And Chief Conley just told me he has to leave soon to go to a graduation. So if you want to front load any questions for him, he needs to leave relatively soon.
I can go quickly. So good afternoon, everyone. Janice Lane, Executive Director of Teaching and Learning.
Laura Jones, Manager for Teaching and Learning.
As you framed, we have been with you several times talking about the curriculum recommendations, getting feedback, and then going back into the field to do additional research based on our last meeting together. I am happy to announce that we have come to a recommendation, and the recommendation is for a K-8 implementation with wit and wisdom, with great minds. That has been the recommendation that came from the review team, as well as from all of the different engagement series that we've done. As we shared earlier, both curriculum choices were of huge high quality, really neck and neck in both the standards alignment piece as well as the work around the content knowledge building. It really came down to a choice around usability and the best match for us at city schools. So you'll see just a few highlighted bullets that we've talked through before. One of the overarching pieces of feedback was that our principals and teachers really thought that it was a great opportunity to look at a K-8 continuum of content build, and that Wit and Wisdom does offer that, as well as instructional routines and strategies that happen aligned through K-8. The second piece was the readiness for district-wide implementation. As you know, this is a Great Minds product. It is an alignment of the Eureka Math Great Minds, so teachers that teach both literacy and math will have a familiarity around that, as well as alignment to current district initiatives that we utilize. So looking at our alignment to the instructional models and the way things work in our current block of time. You'll also see educative features came out that it was identified as teacher-friendly resources, again, that build cohesively and coherently, not only across a grade level, but across and within grade levels, so that when you look at second grade, what does that look like from the start of the year to the end of the year, but then how does that build on what happened in first and connect to grade 3? And then finally, also talking really through the arts integration. As you've heard, we are focused on some arts integration work across the district and really looking at that alignment across content areas as an opportunity for us to continue that engagement and to help students expand both their visual and cultural literacy within this work. And then finally, another additional piece that rose to the top here was the strong parent resources. So there are ongoing module overviews for every grade level, for every module that allow parents, to understand the text that students will be reading, the core essential learning that will be happening. There's fluency homework built in that parents can work with their students at home. There's also cultural relevant opportunities for families within the curriculum. So after a very rigorous process of review, engagement, and preview, this is our recommendation to you for implementation for next school year.
Okay, so I'm a third grade teacher, and my understanding too is, okay,
You're staying in third grade today, that's right.
This is big, because this is a district-wide implementation, and we're adopting it, and let's be clear, is it okay, Commissioner Cherney, to talk about the 12th that we're going to adopt the curriculum on the, it's the, yeah, okay, I didn't see it on next steps. Board approval, procurement item for the board. Yeah, so we had announced at the last meeting that it was going to be June 26th, and that after discussion, you guys are bringing this to us now, and we were compelled as a board to say, because we want to get this in the hands of teachers as quickly as possible, to get the materials, to start the plannings, to help you all get the PD ready. We want to get input on the front end, but at the end of the day, we feel really great about this recommendation and your guys' great work. So thank you. It's been great work, and now we're ready to go, I guess. But this is the really hard work. A district-wide implementation is really challenging. So I'm a third grade teacher. Can you just kind of take me through, like, how am I going to, when can I actually look at the materials and get PD around it?
Sure. So on the evening of the 12th, once the vote happens, we can actually share information with teachers where they will get full access to the digital materials. So they will have access that they can go in and look at every resource, look at the grade level companions that go with each guide, et cetera, so that they'll have that immediate access. at the
How do you get immediate access as a teacher?
from the website. So we'll
You-
be sharing that information where they'll get a login.
They'll get a log,
information. Yes,
everyone gets a login.
That's right. They'll get the whole curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
correct. They'll get a user code right now that will
Mm-hmm.
be a generic user code for Baltimore City, that they'll be able to go in and look at their grade level. They'll be able to go in and download and print any of the resources that they want to utilize at that point. So part of the reason that we wanted to bring it on the 12th, and thank you for that consideration, was so that we could get teachers
Before they
access,
leave.
school leaders
Yeah.
before they leave. And also, many of our principals asked for that immediate access, so that even before the closeout of the year, they could potentially look at the materials together during collaborative planning and some other sessions. During the CAO's Institute in the latter part of June, we will also walk through with our principals that they bring along 2 teacher members or school members with them for CAO Institute. So we'll preview the materials and overview with them and dig into what it actually looks like from day-to-day lesson planning. And then similar to our rollout last year of Eureka, we will have 2 sessions, potentially considering a third right now. But right now, there's a session in July and a session in August for all teachers to sign up and register for that work so that they could come in and engage in a 3-day institute around their grade level specific curriculum. And then also in August, when we kick off at the start of the beginning of the year, one of those days will be dedicated to time for teachers around the new curriculum and how that work rolls out. Currently, what will happen, we will also then work with our partners at Great Minds to develop a year-long scope and sequence of professional development, so that when we talk later about procurement, you'll see that that's part of what we're doing in this, that we also know that all of the work that was done to lead up to the decision is just a toe in the water of what we need to do now to ensure that our school leaders, our teachers, as well as our district staff that support the implementation have all of the materials and the training that they need.
So is there a point where the students will be evaluated to see where they place in this new curriculum that's coming in? Is there a pre-testing or something so that we know that the students are being placed correctly in the program? Does that make sense?
There are diagnostics built within each of the grade levels and formative assessments that are built in that we'll be able to track as students engage with their grade level appropriate material. And I think that just launches the other question that may come up, just as a foreshadow piece, is once this decision is made and finalized, that will trigger a conversation around the comprehensive assessment strategy that goes along with the curriculum, similar to what we did with Eureka. As you remember with Eureka, that triggered where's the alignment for the standards formative piece, and at that point, we chose ANET for math, so that this would be a conversation that would be similar of, will we do an RFP around assessment and what comes next with that work as well.
But is the assumption there that we will not use iReady? Because this is a new curriculum, we'd find an assessment that's aligned to the new curriculum?
So I would say that we need to investigate all of those considerations before we make a final determination, because iReady is used for some other pieces along the district, plus it's also a diagnostic tool for us to evaluate where students are.
Yeah, I think the other consideration, just, calling iReady the type of assessment that it is, it's a computer adaptive diagnostic assessment. It's not intended to basically
Right.
get at to what extent are we teaching to the curriculum as it's being taught, which is really the purpose of having a curriculum aligned assessment. So I think that's really the basis for which the team needs to go back and take a look to say, like, which data set gives us what we need, and is there a place for one to replace the other?
And what's aligned to PARCC too, so you'd think that this is a standards aligned curriculum, so the curriculum assessments are the ones that are going to be more aligned to PARCC rather than iReady is a diagnostic.
Correct. And if you think about it, basically the way that these would work is think about the ANET assessments, right? So think of them as sort of end of unit assessments. So you're looking at what's been taught of this period of time, how are students mastering the content. That's very different than iReady, which is looking at all of the standards expected to be taught for that grade level to give you an indication of grade level placement. So what's more useful for teachers for this purpose is to understand, this is what I've taught, are students mastering what I've just taught, which is what the assessments that are aligned to the curriculum are intended to do.
My other question is there a potential that we would do both? Or, because we're going to get the pushback around over assessment, so iReady and an ELA assessment and the ANET assessments, or is it
I don't know. How do you respond to that, or you just look at that?
It's something that we have to look at. It's something that we've been in conversations about with our schools, teachers, leaders, even internally. I know that we're committed to having a standards aligned assessment for our new curriculum, aligned to our new curriculum, but I do think there's place for us to have conversation about where and if iReady is still valid for all students or a subset of students.
Thanks.
Did you want to go through the rest of the next steps?
I can just hit it
Or you're
super
okay?
quickly, just
Okay.
to say, as you highlighted, we are making the recommendation to you today for final board approval and vote on June 12th, so next Tuesday. You can see that the implementation support is the piece that we'll be moving to based on that, so thinking about the summer planning and what has to happen for teachers. Within that, also the actual procuring of the materials, so the beginning of ordering, so that we can ensure all materials are in schools by August for teachers. And then that ongoing professional development throughout. As you remember, throughout different presentations, we also talked about curriculum enhancements, because we know not one curriculum will match the need of the entire district. So, having the opportunity to be able to think about the context of Baltimore and bring in some of the rich history and potential in Baltimore that we want to share through the curriculum, as well as the piece around wit and wisdom also does the current alignment with foundations, and that we wanted to take that and build out a deeper scope and sequence around that work and some alignment within that. So again, this is just the first step of the work that we need to do, but we are really eager to bring this recommendation to you fully endorsed, that it is of high quality and rigor that every one of our students deserve. And so we really are eager to get deep into it so that we can get the time with our teachers and our school leaders to ensure effective implementation.
Thank you. I think we're excited. So you have our endorsement and support, and we'll look forward to taking this to the full board. And I'm looking forward to the CAO Institute, because I want to be able to come in and play around with some of this too and see what it's like.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for going back and extending the time in terms of sharing and talking about the choices with more of the community. So I think it's been a great process. And
Great, thank you.
Can I just add my thanks too, that the team has really done just an exceptional job of going through this curriculum in a really thoughtful way, in a really thorough way, engaging experts to really help advise in the process, using your team and developing capacity for team as you do it, engaging the community in a really thoughtful way. I mean, I really think this is an exemplar in terms of the process that we went through to pick what is resulting in a really great selection for the district, and it's going to really make a difference for our students. So I know it's been a huge amount of work. Laura Jones gave me some sense of that in the hallway one day. So I know that it has been exhausting. So I just want to, I can't say how appreciative I think we all are of all the work that you've done, and what a really thoughtful curriculum adoption this has been.
Great, thank you.
thank you. Okay, how many folks do we have, how many signed up for public comment? Just one? Okay. So I want to make certain that we'll be okay. If we can move to the procurement, and we have, do I have 14? I'm hoping that team members have read through these. So I will name them if there are questions, and we'll stop and then get those answered, okay? First one is skilled nursing services. Was there a question on that one? Okay. Translation and interpreter services? They're not shaking heads, okay. Therapeutic and non-therapeutic aid services? Okay. Special education short-term substitutes? I will say that all the ones that I've named so far are all coming through funding through special service, special education, so just if folks wanted to know that.
Correct.
University of Virginia,
Commissioner
Okay.
Chinya, I'd like more information on this, particularly on the National Institute of Justice Comprehensive School Safety Initiative grant.
okay. Is someone here?
For now, or do you want that?
You want it now, or?
Can I have it before the board meeting? Can,
So the extent of my knowledge is that the school system received a substantial grant entitled Comprehensive School Safety. The grant was awarded to Johns Hopkins and the University of Virginia, plus I believe the University of Maryland to provide social wraparound services. What we're doing here is one of the individuals that was assigned to this project at Johns Hopkins is now moving the University of Virginia.
yeah, I see. Yep, thank you. Yeah.
And then we're also picking up a data specialist individual who was the result of an FTE we couldn't fill to be provided by the University of Virginia. So we're essentially moving funds around the grant,
Sure.
but
Thank you.
provide those
Okay,
services.
I think we're okay then. Now I've gone, I went out, good, I'll scroll down. Where am I now? Okay. Strategic Ed Tech?
Is that the 3D printer one?
Correct.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I guess I just have questions on this just generally. So we have a 21st century building. Like, why is this limited to the 21st century schools? That I didn't understand. We're buying 8, but that's just, do we have a fund for that? And what is the fund it's drawing from? I just wanted more clarity on that.
So this is tied to one of the rooms that is in all of the 21st century buildings, which is the technology lab. And so it's one of the pieces that gets placed in there to do extended types of activities with students in a variety of ways. The 3D printing is just one of them. We need to make sure that the teachers that are in the schools have been trained on it, and this particular vendor provides a complete package for that training. So they get the 3D printing training and all of the other components of the other types of things that are in that technology lab as part of that 21st century facility.
And there are 8 of them, 8 printers, and I just lost my place on my.
Yeah.
So it's 2 printers per, how many printers per school? 2 per school? Okay, gotcha. Okay, that's it.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Any other
On
questions?
this one?
What if there are programs in other schools that could, never mind, because this is, I get it, never mind. Still wrapping my brain around it, but never mind.
Okay, different procurement. All right. Speech and language pathology services? Any questions? Okay. As I scroll down, sorry about that. Now, I changed from the list to scrolling. Okay, the ANET, math materials.
Yeah, I've got a series of questions on this. I just, a lot of this stuff is on, I guess the curriculum materials, like Eureka, are open source that we're getting, right? But I'm just kind of confused exactly, specifically, what are we paying for? We have some coaching in here. What's the breakdown of the 1.1 million? For math interim assessments, so we pay for the assessment or is it the data analysis? I'm not clear on specifically what we get for our 1.1 million, because it's a big number. I know they do great work, but I'm just not understand the breakdown by category. And is any of this given to us for free because we're doing it across the district? Anyway, those are my questions.
So I'll start with some of the breakdown.
Yeah.
So not only the assessment, but there's tools and resources and teacher professional learning in the platform. So for example, there's domain professional learning, so virtual opportunities for teachers to engage in content development within the ANET platform. So it's almost like having an entire community within ANET that you have access to as a teacher. There's tools for data reporting, and all kinds of sorts of things for teachers to do in schools.
So they're like 4 math interim assessments?
Yes.
Do we pay for those assessments, like the administration and grading of those assessments? Or is that part of the deal? So I get.
Yeah, so you pay for the assessment in the online platform as like a package per school.
And then the numbers get crunched and give us reports, and then do they help us interpret the
Yes, so we also have times that we work with ANET and they unpack the data with us. We also have them working with schools in developing professional learning for teachers and leaders. to
But we have
unpack
like
the
so
data.
many school, we have so many schools like doing it, so they don't actually, I'm just trying to wonder, like, is there ANET people going out to our schools and actually helping us analyze the data and helping us implement that on a every school basis, or are they teaching us to do it?
So ideally, they're teaching us to do it. But this year, we spent a lot of time during our CLN sessions, like our community learning networks, where the ANET coaches that are in those 20 intensive sites, they worked with all the schools in those CLNs to really do fish bowls around analyzing data, looking at data, making teacher decisions moving forward after analyzing the data. So we spent time this year really looking at how do we leverage the ANET coaches and ANET and their resources for all our teachers and leaders, rather than just the 20 intensive sites.
So I actually didn't know that. We have 20 intensive math sites too,
For ANET, yes.
for ANET, and with coaches going there.
Right,
And then we have a method, so we're paying for those coaches to do that.
and that's part of this package here.
Got you. Okay. So just for something that would be helpful is like, like when we say like the math leadership support, like what percentage of the 1.1 is that? Just the breakdown of the dollars and how they break down? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions on the ANET? Okay. The workbench education, project-based learning. Okay. And that's, again, for 21st century schools, right? And extended learning services, Art with a Heart.
I don't have any more questions.
Okay, if I don't hear anything, I'm moving on. Extended learning services, the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, that's the Orc Kids. Okay. Extended learning services, Leaders of Tomorrow Youth Center.
Commissioner Chenye, I know that we approve fine arts curriculum. I want to know how this particular, because this is a lot of money to increase, and I'm looking at the rationale, but how it aligns to the new fine arts curriculum that we have adopted and this strategic plan that the very important group of arts community members have established. And then also, I'm looking at the evidence of effectiveness, and it says 80% of principals were satisfied with the programs. Are there other data points that we should also be considering besides a satisfaction survey from principals? How are we looking at the effectiveness of LTYC in regards to maybe reading? I don't know. I just want to, are there other data points that we should be looking at just besides the principals are satisfied with the program? I mean, because in essence, it is bringing more staff into the building.
Laura Jones, Manager for Teaching and Learning. Those were a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to answer all of them, but if I miss one, please just remind me. So LTYC provides supplemental arts instruction and supplemental technology instruction. So exactly what they provide can vary school to school depending on what the school's needs are for their particular program in that school. For fine arts instruction, the vendor, depending on the nature of the instruction, they could be using pieces of the district curriculum, or they could be using the vendor-created curriculum, depending on the programming that they've determined with that principal. So that varies, but we have been working with vendors to make sure that the instruction that they're providing is aligned to the standards, and then there is the possibility for them to work with the fine arts teacher in the school to access district curriculum if they wish to do so, depending on what their services are to provide in that particular school.
Awesome. So then what if there is no fine arts or technology teacher in the school? who do they use for support?
There would always be a fine arts teacher in the school unless there was a case of, someone on long-term leave or a vacancy. Every school is required to staff for at least a half-time fine arts teacher. And the staffing is really that they should be staffing at a level that they can provide the instruction through the certified teacher for all students in the school building. For K through 8, high school is a little bit different. So every single school should have that person in the school already, the certified teacher, and then this would be typically an additional art form. So if a school has a music teacher, they might be doing like visual arts. If a school has a visual arts teacher, they might be doing music or theater, depending on the vendor and what that vendor provides.
There are a couple of schools that I know that do not have fine arts teachers, and they have LTYC contractors there, so that might be something to talk about outside of this, but that is why I was asking the question.
Okay. You asked a question about the effectiveness. Yes, so because these 3 extended learning services requests are mid the 3-year contract term, what we did is we reached out to each vendor and requested additional recent evidence of effectiveness in addition to what we provided to the board when we brought these contracts forward 2 years ago. But these vendors are used to a 3-year renewal cycle, so they're all going to reapply through the district's extended learning PQS process in the fall, and then we'll be making contract recommendations. Our goal is to make these recommendations in time for the school-based budgeting process next year. That way, schools will know if there are new vendors available or vendors that they're accustomed to working with that are no longer available to them. During that process, we ask for a wide range of evidence of effectiveness, and that's everything from student-specific data based on pre-tests, post-tests, attendance data, particularly for the vendors that also provide after-school programming. Student attendance data in those programs can be really compelling. With these types of services, it can be really hard for the vendor to find a way to measure the effectiveness that's compelling. So one thing that some of them look at is they'll do student interest surveys, or they'll try to compare school day attendance at programs and in schools that they serve versus schools that they don't serve to see if there's a claim to be made that their program is a draw to bring students to school more often. So there's a lot of different ways that the vendors try to measure their effectiveness, and that's something that they'll all 3 of these vendors will be asked to do in significant detail in the fall.
And I know you're going to do it, but to see how, because we see for school year 16-17, those surveys, I'm curious to see what it will look like for this year also as we move forward. I know you're going to do it. And you see the 80% of participating schools also choose to continue working with LTYC. I'm just curious to see what the satisfaction surveys or any of the surveys look like from this past year.
Yep. And we can certainly request that. The reason that information isn't provided here is because when we asked the vendors for that data, it was, I want to say it was February or March, and they hadn't done that collection yet for this school year. But that's certainly something we can follow up with them on, and we can also request that they include that level of data in their fall application. Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving on to Baltimore School for the Arts Foundation. And the last one, Great Minds, LLC.
Question. So obviously, this is a big one, which is a 5-year deal for $8 million. To me, I think it's just important for us to understand that this is like, this is what comprehensive K through 8 curriculums cost. And this is comparable to other, like, how does it compare if we went with the other one? Not saying we're going with the other one, but I just need some comparable numbers so the public understands that this is a reasonable dollar amount. And I don't even need it right now here in the moment. I just need to be able to, I need to be able to understand by Tuesday that this is a reasonable amount for 5 years to pay for a curriculum. Because what we were told was a lot of this is open source. And so now it's a 5-year, $8 million contract. So you can maybe, so I know it's 524. Maybe if you could you just think about that question? And then I've seen Janice shake her head. Like, what are we paying for? And how is it comparable to other curriculums, K through 8? And then what are we getting open source then, if we're paying $8 million over 5 years?
Yes, and we will add some additional detail to the letter, so it's a little bit more clear exactly what resources are included.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And
we'll
Dr.
look
Chinian?
forward- I'm sorry, I put my
There's
mic
one
on. We'll
more.
look forward for the additional
There's one
information.
more.
Oh, I'm sorry, what did I miss?
NCS Pearson.
Sorry, I didn't see that.
NCS Pearson.
NCS Pearson. Questions? Okay, so now I can say thank you. All right. Ms. Trueheart, I think you're is there anyone else that did not sign up that wished to talk with us? Then, okay, Ms. Trueheart.
Your mic, Ms. Trueheart.
The charter presentation. Lots of questions there. Can you provide us the total number of students who are disabled? Because it's not clear that adding up the categories in the chart gives us that number.
Okay, you mean the total number for the district, is that?
Yes.
Okay.
And physically
Yeah.
That would be students receiving special education services? Is that what you?
I'm going by what the title
Okay.
of the slide says. Now, yeah, do I want to know all the special ed kids? Yeah, but I want to know on slide 15 or so, where it's disabled.
I'll pull it up.
Okay.
Right. What does that mean? How many kids is that? And is that different than special ed? And I would think it should be. On slide number 17, I'm proud that Liberty was way up in the right portion of the slide. So that made me feel good, but I don't get why they're so far out there, because I'm not sure what Joe Manco is doing to achieve that level of student performance for grades 3 through 5 on the park. I want to pat him on the back, but I'm scared to do that. That slide scares me. I don't get why there's a huge gap. You know, if he's just over 720, and then the next closest is what? I don't know.
Like 712.
Yeah. All right. I still only get 3 minutes. Nah, come on now.
No, I didn't say that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
It's just a matter of when the camera stops, but no, we didn't stop you.
You know, one of the things that bothers me about all these presentations is they're intended more for the staff and internal use. And that was clear during some of the comments about the charter numbers, in that we're doing some comparisons across the state. We don't want to see that. We want to see that. But principally, we're more interested in how Baltimore City kids are faring. And so when you're spending a tremendous amount of effort presenting things that reflect what the state wants, I think you're missing the boat on presenting data that we want in this city. Because our fight isn't necessarily with the state. There's a lot of competition going on from school to school. And then that presentation about choice. It's critically important that parents understand what the choices are. And I didn't see the level of information that parents need in the presentation about charters that was succinct enough for them to understand and help make decisions. And so I'd like to see that. I mean, we have this ongoing issue about what information is presented to the public. And, even, when we had the budget session at Liberty, we had 5 people show up. Now, why don't people want to come to these things? Because you're not presenting information that they want, okay? You're not presenting information like how many art teachers do we have in the district, right? Is one of them going to be at my school? Will my children be able to get music? If you got a $1.3 billion budget and you're not telling the community those basic fundamental things, it's fine that you're justifying the jobs here at North Avenue in the budget presentations. But that's not what parents want to come to your budget forum. They want to come and they want to understand how many school psychologists do you have? How many social workers do you have? Right? Is that budget supporting the needs of our children who are in traumatic living arrangements? And you don't say any of that. You don't give us that kind of information that parents absolutely need. I remember Dr. Santelises held a community forum somewhere, and the mother got up and started crying because she didn't know anything about this composite score stuff, right? She had no clue what that meant, and her child couldn't get into the school that they had dreamed of getting into, right? Why is that? How come we've not communicated that information sufficiently and clearly enough to parents? And again, you had a presentation about choice today, right? One of the good things that came out is that there are going to be some pop-ups around the community on choice that hopefully explains to parents about composite scores and about the fact that we don't have a zoned middle school in Northwest Baltimore, right? So what does that mean for a parent where there is no zoned middle school? Now, I think I got a better understanding here today, but it's still not clear to me. Joe Manco and I spend a lot of time talking about my 5th graders. And, even when Arnie Duncan came to visit a few years ago, I told him, I said, I'm not letting my 5th graders leave us. I'm not, until y'all get me a quality middle school, right? We still don't have one. The best that we have coming is Calvin Rodwell will now be reconfigured to K-8 this coming school year. But that's not for new kids. It's for the existing kids who attend Rodwell and Grove Park. So when are you going to open up seats for my kids at Liberty? We don't have that. And I'm sure we're not the only community that doesn't have a zoned middle school. I'd like to know that number. We talked about it here this afternoon, but they need to tell us how many communities don't have zoned middle schools. And middle schools are where we either keep them or we lose them. And if we can't give parents great options at the middle school level, you have failed the children. So anyway, as I was saying, the choice, the pop-ups, and the fact that they want to engage with community members to educate us on this choice process so that we can then liaison with parents, support the parents, ask some of the, I think that's long overdue. And I welcome the opportunity to serve in that role. And I've got a lot of other people who would be willing to do that. Because seeing that parent up there at the microphone crying almost, that broke my heart. And we should never, ever have a situation like that again, where a parent doesn't understand that she should have been more involved. She could have been more involved. She could have chartered a different path for her child. That just bothered me. Slide number 10 in the choice presentation. laid out English language learners. And I go back to my new favorite, my new favorite saying. I took to Oakland, California last week, and they loved it also. Okay, historically oppressed learners are the black children in urban centers who have historically been undereducated. And we don't do anything to accommodate that historical oppression that we have had to endure, starting with the lynching of people trying to read and write in slavery, up to this day where there's no heat in buildings, where there's no air conditioning, there's no books. Half the classes have substitutes who don't know jack, you know. The historically oppressed learners in Baltimore City are the little black children who make up the majority. And until we start accommodating their needs, right, you don't put somebody else in line first. We were here. Like, address our needs for our children, because they need accommodations as well. And the fact that there was 5 slides talking about English language learners really offended me again, because there should have been an equal number of slides to address the little black children who don't get what they need. Middle grades work group. I keep hearing about it. Okay. Their timeline? Are they going to do something? Are they going to come out to the community, talk to us? You know, I don't need to serve on another work group or anything, but I need results. If you're going to put a work group together, give me a timeline. Let me know what they're going to do, right? What the expectations are, right? And I don't hear that, but I keep hearing it thrown out there. It's just like this enrollment task force. When are you going to do something about the problems? Let's not sit and study them forever ad nauseum, right? There is and should be an end state, an end report, right? Some recommendations that come forward. And I think we need them sooner than later.
I can tell you the recommendations from the enrollment, the CEO will probably be bringing forth very soon. And we hear you on some of the, I think we have the same probably follow-up that you do in terms of the middle grades work group and what's going to happen. And I think a couple of things came out today that you've highlighted for us, and I thank you, around middle grades, that whole issue of choice around those high school students that get caught between the two types of choices and are sort of left there. So I think many of us were writing this down, but we will do some follow-up. And I hear you in terms of the types of presentations, and since I'm going to thank you for that and use it sort of as our closing, if I could, for this. The idea of us trying to have meetings in the afternoon was to allow for time to talk more and give the community more opportunity to be here with us. I do hear you, and as we plan for next year, and as our committee continues the format of some of those sessions, I think we're going to have to take a look at again how those presentations are done so that they are informative and helpful, not just for the board members to get a report from staff, but also for parents and community to understand what's happening within the system. So we do thank you for that, and we will take that into our planning. We will begin planning for what happens next year actually on June 26th in terms of our list of topics, and I think what I've heard from you that might be helpful is if we let folks know what they are, so that some questions we could already have generated to be certain that the presentations will cover them.
I definitely think that's important, and recognize that I appreciated the presentation on charters, but that doesn't go over well in the neighborhood.
Okay.
And I am not sufficiently capable of translating, okay? And I don't think I should have to.
No, you shouldn't.
Yeah. And so I thank you for listening and hearing and recognizing that what we need to be presenting to the public has to be reflective of what we need, right? And if you got a $1.3 billion budget, I can't say this enough. Tell me how you're helping my child in my school with that money. And the presentations that were given at the budget forums were way up here.
Okay.
Right? They did not address, and I understand at the school level, but we can generically talk that every elementary school ought to be looking like this. And they ought to be having certain amount of resources available. And those that don't, you're going to tell us how you're going to get them, right? Because we got a lot of deficits in our schools, right? Which aren't very supportive of our babies.
Okay.
And until we put the right resources in place, right? You know, you got people out there thinking we're doing great stuff. Yeah. And that's so untrue in many instances. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
And thank everyone who has been with us for this meeting. Our next session for the Teaching and Learning Committee will be on June 26th. It will be back in the morning. It'll be 9 o'clock. As I mentioned earlier, that will be the session when we talk about some of our plans for next year, as well as some additional reports. So I thank everyone, and at this time, our meeting is adjourned.